Are Korean cars actually better than Japanese cars in 2026? 20 years ago, that question would not have sparked a debate. It would have just encouraged the whole room to start laughing. Korean cars were the punchline to a joke. They were the car you bought because your credit score was, let's say, suboptimal, or because it was just better than a bus pass. Japanese cars, on the other hand, well, they were the gold standard. They were reliable, practical, and engineered with obsessive discipline. And they even made some pretty exciting cars too. JDM classics that rivaled European sports cars. But here we are in 2026, and the conversation has shifted in a way that's starting to feel a little uncanny. Korean automakers are not politely asking to be taken seriously anymore. They're acting like they already are. And conversely, Japanese brands, once the industry disruptors, are starting to feel like incumbents. So I think it's less of a question of whether Korean cars have caught up, but whether the hierarchy itself is starting to shift. Let's dig in. To understand why this question is so puzzling, you have to remember just how low the bar was for Korean cars in the beginning of their North American tenure. In the late 80s and 90s, early cars from Hyundai and Kia entered the US solely on one primary value proposition: a competitive price. Their cars were not exciting or novel or excellent in any way. They were just cheap, cheaply made and cheap to buy. They had low paint quality, sloppy interiors that felt like the inside of a DMV, and engines that behaved like they were assembled on a Friday afternoon. You didn't actively choose a Kia, you just kind of ended up in one. Yet, even back then, there were glimmers of intent. They studied Japanese manufacturing obsessively. They adopted the tenets of lean production and continued improvement. By the early 2000s, Korean cars were still pretty uncool, but they no longer felt disposable. The quality gap between Korean and Japanese cars began to narrow. Reliability improved greatly. One woman actually famously racked up 1 million miles in a 2013 Elantra in 5 years of ownership. I mean, that's a certain kind of hell if you ask me, but pretty cool that she did it. Maybe she felt it was safe to subject her car to such use because it was just a few years prior that Hyundai's master stroke would incentivize a whole new generation of buyers. I'm of course talking about the 100,000 mile warranty. This 10-year powertrain warranty wasn't just a selling point, but a declaration. It was Hyundai and Kia putting their money where their mouth was, saying, look, we know you don't trust us yet. That's fine. We'll assume the risk on your behalf. And it worked. Sales climbed, perception softened. Korean cars became a smart, economical choice, even if they weren't an aspirational one. But then, like Icarus flying too close to the sun, Kia's waxen wings began to melt. In the last 5 years or so, trust in Korean brands started to fall to an all-time low. Right when Hyundais and Kias started to be quite popular on the road, they were hit with back-to-back scandals. It started with massive engine recalls, most notably the Theta 2 engine, which suffered from oil consumption, bearing damage, engine seizures, unexpected stalling, and even fires. It wasn't just a recall issue, it was an existential problem, because as time went on, these issues affected more and more models until eventually it seemed like every Hyundai or Kia produced within a 10-year window needed an engine replacement. I mean, if you drive behind a 2015 Kia today, half the time they'll still be leaving a trail of smoke behind them from the burning oil. Dealerships were backed up for months with warranty work, and eventually owners started getting their warranty claims denied for petty reasons like a lack of oil change receipts or otherwise. Ultimately, this led to multiple huge class action lawsuits against the company, and culturally it landed at the worst possible time. Hyundai and Kia were in the midst of a reinvention, and just as they were asking customers to start seeing them as legitimate competitors to Japanese brands, all the people who jumped on board were punished for their decision within just a few years of ownership, and that's really gotta sting. In an attempt to make things right, Hyundai and Kia started offering 150,000 or 15-year warranties to people who decided to hold on to their cars after keeping an engine replacement. Keeping the car often wasn't even a choice, but the only option, as resale values tanked and many owners were likely financing their vehicles still. Selling them would leave them totally upside down on the loan. But wait, there's more. You took a chance on a Kia. The engine blew up, it was replaced under warranty, and now you got a nice 150,000 mile cushion should anything else happen. It's not an ideal situation, but it could be a whole lot worse. Then it did get worse because some teenagers figured out that you could steal nearly any Kia or Hyundai in like 30 seconds with the USB drive. The Kia boys became a national crisis. Thousands of disenfranchised, terminally online youth were stealing and joyriding cars for online clout. Every city in America was passing out steering wheel locks for free because the police were getting multiple reports of stolen Kias every single night. Because as it turned out, unlike any other car of the modern era, Korean cars didn't have immobilizers. Seeing your car stolen by a 14-year-old with an iPhone charger is certainly demoralizing, and it undermines the basic promise of modern car ownership. The Kia boys did nearly as much damage to the social standing of Korean cars as the engine recalls did, if not more. You'll see surviving cars of this era parked in a suburban dentist office using a yellow steering wheel club as if they're being left overnight on the south side of Chicago. You would think, at this moment, the public perception would have been calcified. The narrative could have become permanent. Kia tried to grow too quickly, and look what happened. But that's where the story gets really interesting, because now in 2026, less than a decade from when Kia and Hyundai were at their darkest depths, they're in many respects industry leaders. Their comeback is remarkable not because they fixed individual problems, but that they treated the entire era as evidence of a deeper flaw, growth without structural maturity. Instead of defending their actions or making excuses, they set a course for rebirth. Entire engine platforms were retired. Leadership publicly admitted fault, and they were willing to burn down what wasn't working and essentially start from scratch. Now, it's important to contrast that to the story of Japanese automakers. In the 80s and 90s, Japanese brands didn't improve cars, they totally redefined what a car should be. Toyota perfected lean manufacturing. Honda turned engineering efficiency into an art form. Reliability became a cultural export. Cars like the Corolla, Civic, or 4Runner weren't emotional purchases, rife with exotic luxury or appeal, but they were rationally flawless, and they kind of continue to be that way. You bought one because you didn't want to think about your car ever again. But at the same time, they also revolutionized performance with the Supra, the RX-7, or the NSX. While they were really good at making cars with the functional utility of an appliance, Japanese brands are also responsible for some of the most iconic import cars the world had ever seen. By the early 2000s, it was clear. Japan had won. They didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. And that's where the story begins to change, because success has a cost. Once you become the default choice, well, experimentation becomes a risk. Modern Japanese brands feel very settled, comfortable, bordering on conservative, iterative to a fault. The safest path forward is to simply make the same car again with slightly better tech and slightly less engaged driving experience. And why wouldn't you? A majority of drivers are not enthusiasts, and that demographic rewards consistency. If every Toyota is expected to go 300,000 miles, why risk changing it? The same cultural inertia that built trust over the last 40 years has slowed momentum. I mean, look at Nissan or Mitsubishi. They're not exactly poster childs for innovation these days. If you're a Mitsubishi fan, we actually did a whole deep dive on them. Why don't you go and check that out when you're done with this video? But recent missteps from big companies like the Toyota's Tundra recalls or Honda's really poor execution of the Prelude have started to expose the cracks in the illusion of invincibility. Even when Japanese brands try to do something exciting, it often feels restrained, over-engineered. Everything has to justify itself in efficiency metrics, emissions targets, and global scalability. The result is excitement that feels engineered around restrictions rather than born in spite of them. I mean, the Prelude is a great example. It was meant to be a bold return, yet it is a far cry from an enthusiast machine. Hybrid powertrain, CVT transmission, overpriced and underwhelming. Yikes. None of this means Japanese brands are bad. It means they're behaving exactly like incumbents always do. They protect what they've already earned, even if that stifles experimentation or progress. If you look at the design of Korean cars compared to the Japanese cars, you can see the differentiation in philosophy. Hyundai and Kia are not designed to be universally appealing. They eschew many of the tropes and design pitfalls that a lot of Japanese cars fall into. I think this is because they have had to deliberately define and then redefine their place in the market. Their cars are distinct and recognizable in a way that many vehicles no longer are. The Santa Fe and Palisade embrace the kind of brutalist hard-edge design, almost like a retro-futurist interpretation of early utilitarian SUVs. The upcoming Kia K4 hatchback actually looks pretty good, and it looks more like an ultra-modern, sporty station wagon than your traditional four-cylinder hot hatch. And even the Santa Cruz is a cool little ute-type car truck thing, and you just don't see those that much nowadays. And whether it's to your taste or not, these cars stand out, and that's intentional. They have to. They don't have decades of emotional equity to lean on. They have to establish an identity amidst stiff competition, in the same way Japanese brands did on their rise to power. Korean brands really start to feel a little dangerous when you consider their value. Across multiple categories, Hyundai or Kia offer more for the money. Better tech, more features at lower trim levels, interiors that feel slick and deliberate instead of durable by default. The higher you go in price, the more the gap widens, and that's not even mentioning the warranty, looming over every comparison. 10 years and 100,000 miles means a lot to a cautious buyer. Instead of having to guess whether or not it's going to last, they have no reason to not at least give it a go. Japanese brands rely on the trust they built decades ago, while Korean brands are actively earning it in real time. The tables really start to turn when you see the way in which Kia and Hyundai operate in the electric vehicle space. The eGMP platform is among the best in the industry. They offer good power, fast charging, highly competitive range, and thoughtful design. Kia's EV6 and EV9 and Hyundai's Ioniq series are widely praised. They exist as a stark contrast to some other brands', let's say, hesitant EV strategy. Fully committing to EVs requires cultural and infrastructural upheaval. Korean brands have lived through that chaos, having been destroyed and rebuilt already. They're not afraid of investing entirely in new platforms and technologies, whereas an established brand with decades of experience with ICE or hybrid vehicles, the chasm may feel a little bit more daunting. EVs are becoming more and more popular and have incited a whole new type of enthusiast. I don't think that they've stolen loyalty away from ICE evangelists such as ourselves here on the rear view, but they've attracted the interest of tech-minded individuals who previously could not care less about the car they drove as long as it started every time and had Apple CarPlay. But as that demographic grows and EVs become less of a niche and more of a viable option for many drivers, Kia and Hyundai have already established themselves as one of the biggest innovators in the space. Let's bring it back around. Are Korean cars better than Japanese cars in 2026? Not universally, not yet anyway. Japan still owns long-term trust. They're the benchmark for both reliable commuters and enthusiasts alike. They hold their value both monetarily and in terms of mechanical permanence. If you want something safe, familiar, and historically proven, I think Japanese brands remain unmatched. But if you want something modern, bold, technologically aggressive, and backed by a warranty that dares you to doubt it, Korean cars are becoming an increasingly competitive choice. Will today's Korean cars age as gracefully as yesterday's Japanese ones? I guess we don't know yet, but for one thing, the rise of Korean brands certainly feels earned, in direct opposition to natural order. They should have fallen into obscurity multiple times over by now, but that's just not the case. In many ways, they're more relevant than famed Japanese brands who have outlived their life expectancy. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite Korean export is. Is it the new Hyundai? Maybe it's K-pop Demon Hunters, or maybe it's just some tasty japchae from the restaurant down the street. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.